If you're a privately owned orthopedic practice, tune in with me for a minute and let me know if this sounds a little bit familiar. Your doc schedules are full most of the time. Patients are coming through the door. You're receiving referrals, and everything looks pretty good until you see it on paper. And then you start to think through, we actually have a lot of gaps in our schedule, or people aren't showing up, or maybe even the referrals we used to get, they're not appearing as often as they used to. And if you're a normal practice, you're likely losing between 20 and 30% of your referral traction just on average. And that's the average. I just recently read a statistic that in medical practices, it can be up to 65% of referrals that never come through the door. And that can really ding your bottom line. When we look at that 20 to 30%, that equates to over 7 figures a year and sometimes multiple 7 figures a year. In today's episode, we're going to not only dive into why this is happening, but also the steps you can take to prevent it and the exact cost that it's likely costing your practice to leave this hiccup unchecked. If we haven't met yet, I'm Alisa Conner, and I help both specialty medical practices and professional services organizations grow, not by outspending their competitors, but instead creating client and patient experiences that other people can't wait to talk about. Orthopedics is one of the highest revenue generating specialty practices in the industry. And a single surgeon can generate over $3 million a year in downstream revenue. Now, I want to emphasize downstream because it means that your revenue is specifically dependent on outside sources. So whether that is referring physicians or word of mouth referrals or any other advertising or marketing you might be doing. This puts a lot of pressure on your practice administrator to manage something that most practices don't have a firm hold on. That's not to say that your practice administrator doesn't have their ducks in a row. More often than not, what I run into is that there's just no process that's ever been created around referral management. And if it is created, it's rarely strictly adhered to. And usually nobody's measuring the people that never make it onto the schedule. And that can be a huge disadvantage to your practice and also cost you a lot of money. Speaking directly to practice administrators, typically, the referral leakage problem ends up on your desk, whether you want it or not. And there's several reasons why the referral leakage problem occurs and why it ends up with you. The first being that you likely receive referrals from outside sources, whether that's a word of mouth referral or it's another physician referral or a partner referral, whatever that might be, but there's no urgency around that referral. You don't know, or you don't have any idea, like, does this person have a bone sticking out of their leg? How quickly do they need to be seen? And there's no classification for that. And if there is, it can still get missed. And so those are the people that are like, red flag, 911, we need to be in your office immediately. But until you hear from the patient, or you get a direct call from the referral source saying, we need this person to be seen today, you likely don't have any idea about how urgent the cases are that are being sent to you. So you set up a process and you just triage everybody the same way. And oftentimes that means people fall through the cracks. And you either have a emergency phone call that you're getting from somebody who did fall through the cracks, or worse, the person that should have been in your office and been on the schedule never makes it there. The second challenge that orthopedics specifically runs into is imaging challenges. A lot of times they either don't get the imaging, or imaging hasn't been done, or it's been lost, it's not attached to the patient file. And this causes a significant delay in being able to schedule because the docs can't really make any kind of diagnosis without imaging. We all know this. So if there isn't a specific task checkoff for imaging or somebody checking to see if that imaging is there, and I understand completely that the staff typically is running around with their hair on fire and there's not enough people and there's not enough hours in the day to get the job done. But when we want to add people to the calendar, it's really important that we have all of our boxes checked off so that we can get them through the process and into the operating room as quickly as possible. Oftentimes when imaging is missing, nobody reaches out to the patient to say, hey, we're missing your imaging. It just sits there because you're waiting on somebody to send that to you. And in the meantime, the patient is sitting there wondering what's happening and whether or not they're ever going to get in to see the doc. And then to compile on top of that, typically it's no one's job, but everyone's job to manage these referrals. And so when nobody has full accountability for this process and for how referrals are handled or managed within an organization or within a practice, it makes it really hard to know exactly where people are falling through the cracks and how to stop that from happening so that you stop bleeding revenue from your referral process. And on top of all of that, the practice administrator has an actual different job. If you can relate, you likely, as a practice administrator, have an entire other job besides referrals that end up on your desk anyway, and it's taking away from the tasks that you actually need to complete because referrals are mismanaged or mishandled or have gone awry in some way, shape, or form. And typically, it's those fire drill referrals that end up taking a good chunk of your day, putting you even more behind on the to-dos that you have left on your desk. And at the end of the day, you may even feel like you don't get anything accomplished because you're constantly chasing down and putting out fires. The other challenge that orthopedic offices specifically struggle with is the knowledge gap that occurs around intake. You have, in the orthopedic practices specifically, have such a document heavy requirement when it comes to urgency and it comes to your imaging, prior authorization, insurance verification, and all of the things that you have to check off your list, that if that process only lives in one or two people's heads, if those people leave or they go on vacation or there's an emergency or for some unforeseen reason they can't be in the office, your referral system is likely going to come to a grinding halt, or it's going to end up on somebody's plate that is not equipped to handle it. The end result of that is that your referrals will go into a downhill slide, and it's going to affect the growth and profitability of your practice. So let's talk math for a minute. And a lot of people don't like to do the math and they think it's complicated and hard, but I'm going to make it as easy as I can for you. If you lose 3 surgical cases a week because of referral leakage, and each of those cases is worth around $6,000 just for surgery, you're on average losing $18,000 a week. If you multiply that by 52 weeks, it's just under $1 million a year. And that's very much on the low end of the spectrum. So let's look at orthopedic specific data. We're looking at that average number and we're splitting the difference between 30 and 55%. We're going to use 42%. If the average orthopedic office loses 2,600 cases a year and we multiply that by 42%, that gives us just over 1,000 cases a year that you're missing out on. And it's 1,092 to be specific. If we multiply that by $6,000, that gives us the grand total of $6,552,000 that you are missing out on that could be revenue for your practice. That's not anything to laugh at. That's a pretty significant amount of money, no matter what size your organization is. The other factor that a lot of practices don't even look at is that this is just part one of the loss that you feel when you are dependent on downstream referrals. Not only are you missing out on the initial patient revenue for surgery, but you're also missing out on all of the other services that your practice offers. Like perhaps you have your own imaging, so you lose out on that. Perhaps you have your own physical therapy office. You miss out on physical therapy, which could be extensive and go on for a while. You miss out on any follow-up visits. You can't bill for any of those things. And so you're not just missing out on the surgical case. You're missing out on an entire opportunity. And we're just calculating numbers on surgery specifically. You can just imagine how this would affect your practice long term, or even just over the course of a year. The referral funnel works the other way as well. If someone comes to your office for just physical therapy, or they're referred to your office and you don't take them as a physical therapy case, you may be thinking, whatever, it's $150 a visit. We're not going to make that much money off of them. But if they go to an outside source for that physical therapy, 60% of those people are never coming back. They're going to go to a different office or for one reason or another. And so that $150 quickly becomes between $6,000 and $40,000, depending on all of the services I just talked about that they will get from someone else. And so when you're looking at your physical therapy department and you're thinking about those physical therapy patients, if you're sending them elsewhere and there isn't a process around keeping up with those people, you might want to rethink that process and invest a little bit more heavily in either keeping track of the patients and the referrals that you are sending other places to ensure that they are getting the treatment they need, or keeping them in-house, because that is the part of the downstream referral process that nobody looks at, nobody measures, and frankly, nobody talks about. If we were to look at those numbers, and I just threw that 60% out there, that was a statistic I recently read. We can do some simple math around that too. If you get 10 patients a week that come in and they need physical therapy, and if you refer out 60% of them, that's 6 patients. Well, those 6 patients, if they ended up needing surgery and 2 of those patients needed surgery, that's another $12,000 a week that your practice is losing money. That's not talking about the previous numbers. These are numbers that would be added to those numbers. And that equates to over $500,000 a year on the conservative side of things. That's just taking, 30% of the 60% that you send away. Those are 2 additional patients times $6,000 minimum surgical procedure is $12,000 a week times 52 weeks. It's just over $500,000. So if we were to add that other $500,000 to the original number that we just calculated for orthopedics, you're looking at over $7 million a year in lost revenue just because your referral process isn't specific, doesn't follow a framework, and you don't have someone specifically managing and monitoring those referral systems to ensure that people aren't leaking through the cracks. When we look at this as a whole, this isn't a scheduling problem. People can't get on the schedule if they've never been called to be put on the schedule. And it's definitely not a marketing problem because these are people that are already being sent to you and you haven't had to do anything to attract their attention. In fact, you're burning the relationship before he even has a chance to get started. This is a high value leakage problem that has a simple solution. And the challenging part of this is you already have surgical revenue in motion and you're letting that fall through the cracks. There is a solution to this, and it doesn't have to overwhelm your team with more challenges, more work, and more frustration. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But first, let me reiterate why this problem exists, and then you're going to get your action plan for this week. The first reason is that there's no urgency attached to cases as they come in. And that not only causes a headache for your practice administrator, it causes people to fall through the cracks or go somewhere else because they feel like they're not paid attention to. The other challenge is missing imaging. And this can stall or stop a referral in its tracks. And oftentimes, if there is missing imaging, the patient is the one that's sitting there waiting for somebody to tell them what's going on. But while your office is trying to track down the imaging, nobody's reached out to the patient to let them know what's going on. And so when there's no communication with the patient, their trust in your practice starts to erode quickly. And so that makes them start to question whether they're in the right place or not. The third challenge is in physical therapy. And we talked about that. If you are sending people outside of your practice for physical therapy, if there's no process in place to follow back around with those people to ensure that their treatment is going well or that they don't need additional services like surgery. And this is exactly what happened to me. I went to multiple physical therapists and never got relief, and they didn't send me anywhere. I ended up going to my GP and she sent me somewhere. I didn't like that person. So then I ended up on the internet and found somebody else. And that's where I ended up going. There were multiple opportunities for the other doctors that are associated with those practices or that could have had partnerships with any of those physical therapy practices or could have followed back around with me to get me to come back and have surgery with them. And again, even after I had surgery, I went to physical therapy at the surgeon's office, but still have challenges. And because nobody followed up with me and they didn't have time for me, I've now sought out different care from other places. So think about through that process, where you're leaving money on the table because people will spend money to fix their health if it's necessary to improve their daily lives. So if you tune into the Profit Loop Weekly, you know that every week I try to give you an action plan so that you can take a few steps to move you forward and move you out of the challenges that you're experiencing. This week is no different. So let's dive into this week's action plan. Step number 1, I want you to go and take a look at your intake process and see where people are getting stuck. Where are patients getting stuck and never getting scheduled? And document how many times a week that is happening. How many patients? Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 20? Is it 90? Just so you have an idea, just write down the number. You can look at 4 weeks if you want to do an average and just choose, because some weeks will be different than others, and just add those up and divide it by 4 and create an average. The second thing I want you to take a look at is imaging. How many patients are in the queue, or how long have they been in the queue because you can't find their imaging, they don't have imaging, or you're waiting on imaging? And where are those patients? How many of those patients are sitting in that queue? And do the same math. Is it, how long have they been sitting in the queue? Has it been weeks? And one extra credit piece of this is how many of them have been reached out to by your office to let them know where they are in the process. Write down that number. And then the third piece is to talk to your docs or look through the files and see how many patients you see every week that you're referring to outside PT providers. So your fourth action step is to look at all of those numbers and do your own math for your own practice. Add those numbers up for the week, multiply them by whatever the average amount surgical case is for your office, and then multiply that by 52. And that's your referral leakage problem. When you start to look at that in depth, the last piece of your action plan is to identify one place in one of those 3 areas that you can start to plug the leak. And just taking one step, whether that's we're going to follow up with every imaging case within 48 hours and let them know where they are, or we're going to come up with the process around intake so that we're ensuring we're communicating effectively not only with the doctor that's giving us the referral, but also the patient, whatever it might be. Write it down and then start to implement it. If you've made it to the end of this episode, you likely realize you have a referral leakage problem. And if you're the practice administrator listening to this or watching this video, you're likely tired of it ending up on your desk. If that's you, that's the exact reason I created the Referral Recovery Lab, opening on June 4th. This is a roundtable created specifically for practice administrators to come in and address and fix their referral leakage challenges. The lab is only going to be open to 20 founding members. That's it. I'm only going to have 20 slots, and that's very specific and intentional. And that's because I want to be able to have the one-on-one time to work with each of you to ensure that you're making progress, you're able to implement, and that we're actually getting you traction for the time, attention, and energy that you're investing. The unique opportunity available to being a founding member is twofold. One, you get to help define, create, and ensure that everything that needs to be included in this program is in there. We're going to build it together. The second unique opportunity for this program is that getting into the founding membership program is going to be the lowest price this is ever offered at. I have no doubts that this is going to fill, and it's going to fill quickly. So at the bottom of this video, or in the description of the video, or in the description of the podcast, you're going to find a link to go get on the wait list. You can also get there by going to alisaconner.com/lab. And once you get on the wait list, you're going to be the first one that's notified when this opens. If all those slots open because the wait list people go and fill them up, they're gone. The program will close and it will reopen when I relaunch it once we go through the first cohort, which will be about 90 days. If you want to know more about the program and you want to get on the wait list, click the link on the button below and go put your name on there. I fully encourage you to get on the wait list so that you're the first to know. There could be high likelihood that the people who get on the wait list might get a little bit of advance notice for the opening of the program. So click the link or go to alisaconner.com/lab and put your name on the wait list if you're ready to solve this incredibly expensive referral leakage problem. As always, I appreciate you so much for being here and making it to the end of this episode. If you found value in this episode, I would love for you to share it with a colleague, a friend, or someone else who would find it valuable. Hit the like button and subscribe if you would like to stay in the loop for further episodes about not only referral leakage, but how to increase revenue without increasing spend in your practice. In the meantime, I'll see you next week. Take care, be well, stay safe. See you soon.